Welcome to Live a Supercharged Life. You know the podcast, the one that ignites your energy, uplifts your spirit, and helps you embrace life's brilliance.
All that good stuff.
And today we are taking a deep dive
We are.
into a topic that I know can be tough, but is so important for building strong, fulfilling relationships.
Huh.
We're talking about one-sided relationships.
One-sided relationships.
Oh, yeah.
It can be rough. It's something that can really affect anyone, whether it's a romantic relationship,
Oh, for sure.
a friendship, even family dynamics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know me, I'm all about creating those supercharged connections. But sometimes we find ourselves in situations where the energy just isn't flowing both ways.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, you shared some really fascinating research and articles with me.
I did.
We've got studies on emotional impact, practical advice for recognizing those red flags, and even some strategies for healing and creating more balanced relationships.
Yeah, we've got a lot of good stuff in this one. All about equipping you with the tools and insights to build healthier connections.
Yes.
Whether you're currently in a one-sided relationship or want to avoid them in the future.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty, can you give us a clear definition of what we mean by one-sided? Because it's not always as obvious as it seems, right?
You're right. It's not always black and white. But the core concept here is an imbalance in an emotional investment.
Okay.
It's where one person consistently puts in more effort, energy, and emotion than the other.
So it's not just about who does the dishes more often or plans more dates. It's about the emotional weight of the relationship.
Exactly. And that can show up in so many ways.
Yeah.
Maybe you're always the one initiating conversations,
Right.
making plans, offering support, or perhaps you constantly feel emotionally drained
Yes.
and unappreciated, like you're pouring from an empty cup.
That imagery of the empty cup, so powerful. And you know, one of the articles you sent me, Navigating Emotional Imbalances, I think it's called, it mentioned that both people in these relationships can actually feel unhappy, but for different reasons. What's going on there?
Yeah, that's a fascinating point. You know, it's not uncommon for the person who's giving more to feel exhausted, resentful, even taken for granted.
Right.
But on the flip side, the person receiving more can also experience feelings of guilt,
Oh,
pressure, even a sense of being smothered.
interesting.
It really highlights how crucial that sense of balance and reciprocity is in any relationship.
It's like that saying, it takes two to tango.
Exactly.
But how do we know if we're actually in this kind of dynamic? And we all have times when we might be giving more or needing more, right?
Sure.
When do those normal ebbs and flows turn into red flags?
That's a great question, and it's where self-awareness becomes really important. It's true that relationships aren't always perfectly balanced all the time, but there are certain signs that can point towards a more chronic pattern of imbalance.
Hit us with those red flags. I'm ready to take notes.
Well, one of the most telling signs is that one person consistently initiates conversations and plans activities. If you think about it, are you always the one reaching out? Always the one making an effort to connect?
You know, in one of the studies you shared, they found that over 80% of people in one-sided relationships reported being the sole initiators of conversation.
Wow.
That's a pretty staggering statistic.
It is, and it really highlights how common this dynamic can be. But it's not just about who reaches out first.
Okay.
Think about the quality of the interactions, too. Do you feel genuinely heard and understood? Or are you constantly walking on eggshells or minimizing your own needs to avoid conflict?
Okay, so avoiding conflict. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
It sounds almost counterintuitive. Could you explain a bit more about how that could be a red flag?
Sure, it's not that healthy relationships don't have disagreements or conflicts. It's more about how those conflicts are handled.
Okay.
If you find yourself constantly apologizing, making excuses for your partner's behavior, or downplaying your own feelings to keep the peace,
It could be a sign that you're not truly being seen or valued in the relationship.
that makes sense. It's like you're putting their needs and comfort above your own, even when it's at your expense.
Exactly. And that can take a real toll on your emotional well-being over time.
Which brings me to my next question. What is the impact of these one-sided relationships on our mental and emotional health? Because I know we often talk about the importance of healthy boundaries and self-care,
Right.
but I'm curious to hear your perspective on the specific consequences of being in this type of dynamic.
Well, you know, being in a one-sided relationship can be incredibly draining
I bet.
and even lead to serious consequences for your mental, physical, and emotional health. You might start to experience chronic stress,
Sure.
anxiety, and even sleep problems
Oh, wow.
as you constantly worry about the relationship or feel emotionally depleted.
And I imagine self-esteem takes a hit too, right? When you're constantly giving and not receiving that same energy back, it's got to affect how you see yourself. Absolutely. It's natural to start questioning your worth and value when your efforts aren't reciprocated.
Right.
You might feel inadequate, unlovable, or even start to believe that you don't deserve to have your needs met.
Wow, that's a heavy realization. Definitely something for our listeners to reflect on. It's not just about feeling a little annoyed or frustrated. It can actually impact your whole sense of self.
It can. And it's why recognizing these patterns early on is so important, because once you start to see those red flags, you can start taking steps to protect your well-being and create healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
That's a perfect segue to our next section. Now that we've laid the groundwork and understand the potential consequences, I'm eager to dive into those strategies for breaking free and healing.
Yeah, let's do it. It's all about reclaiming your power.
Yes.
And creating relationships that truly nourish your soul.
Love it.
So much of it starts with acknowledging your feelings and needs.
Yeah.
You deserve to be in relationships where your efforts and emotions are reciprocated.
I love that. It's about recognizing your worth and setting boundaries, which, speaking of, can be tough.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin with that?
It can be tough, especially if you're used to putting others' needs before your own.
Right.
But the first step is being honest with yourself about how you're feeling in the relationship.
Oh.
What are your non-negotiables? What are those things you absolutely need to feel loved, respected, and supported?
So it's about getting clear on what you're willing to accept and what you're not. Right.
Exactly. And once you've identified those boundaries, it's time to communicate them clearly and assertively to the other person.
Okay, but what if you've tried communicating your needs and nothing changes? What if they promise to make an effort but fall back into old patterns?
Yeah.
I know one of the articles you sent mentioned something called an exit strategy. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that you always have choices, and sometimes the healthiest choice is to walk away from a relationship that's no longer serving you. An exit strategy is basically a plan you create for yourself. It outlines what steps you'll take if the situation doesn't improve within a certain time frame.
It makes sense. It's about giving yourself a clear path forward, even if it's a difficult one. But I imagine that making that decision to leave, even if it's the right one, can feel really isolating and lonely.
It can.
What advice do you have for people who might be going through that process?
You're right. It can be incredibly tough. That's why surrounding yourself with a strong support system is so crucial during this time.
Yeah.
Reach out to trusted friends, family members, or even a therapist, people who can offer you emotional support, practical advice, and help you stay grounded throughout the process.
It's about having those cheerleaders in your corner, reminding you of your worth and strength when you might be feeling most vulnerable.
Exactly. And remember, seeking professional guidance can be incredibly helpful during this time. A therapist can provide a safe and supportive space for you to process your emotions, develop coping mechanisms, and build healthy relationship patterns moving forward.
It's about investing in your own healing and growth, even if it's messy and uncomfortable at times. Speaking of growth, one thing I found fascinating in the research you sent was how much our past experiences can shape our relationship dynamics. There was that whole section on attachment styles, which, to be honest, I'd heard the term before but never fully grasped. Can you break that down for us a bit?
Of course. Attachment theory basically suggests that our early childhood experiences, especially those with our primary caregivers, can shape how we form and navigate relationships as adults. It's about how we learn to connect with others, and how those early patterns of relating can play out in our romantic relationships, friendships, even in the workplace.
So, for example, someone who grew up in a household where their emotional needs weren't consistently met might be more likely to seek validation and acceptance in their adult relationships, even if those relationships are unhealthy or imbalanced.
Exactly. It's like those early experiences created a blueprint for how we approach love and connection. And if that blueprint is based on insecurity or a fear of abandonment, we might find ourselves unconsciously recreating those same dynamics in our adult lives, even if they're causing us pain.
That's so insightful. It makes me realize how important self-awareness is in breaking those cycles. We need to understand those underlying patterns to make conscious choices about the relationships we create.
Absolutely. And therapy can be a powerful tool for unpacking those past experiences and understanding how they might be influencing your present relationships.
It's about gaining that clarity and making those connections between the past and present.
Right. And once you have that awareness, you can start to challenge those old beliefs and patterns and make different choices that align with your needs and values.
Okay, so let's say you've done the work. You've gained some self-awareness, you're starting to set those boundaries, and you're ready to create more balanced, fulfilling relationships. What advice do you have for navigating that new chapter?
The first thing is to trust your instincts. You've learned so much about yourself and what you need in a relationship. Don't be afraid to listen to that inner voice. If something feels off, it probably is.
It's about honoring those gut feelings,
Yeah.
right? You're usually trying to tell us something important.
Exactly. And remember, healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, open communication, and a shared sense of effort. It's not about keeping score or striving for perfect balance every minute of every day, but it's about feeling like both partners are invested in creating a connection that feels good for both of them.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where both people feel valued, heard, and supported.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to take things slowly. Get to know someone before diving headfirst into a relationship.
Yeah.
Observe their actions, how they treat others, and how they respond to your needs and boundaries.
It's about choosing quality over quantity, right?
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are so many resources available to support you. Books, articles, online forums, support groups, even podcasts like this one. And of course, if you're finding it challenging to navigate these dynamics on your own, don't hesitate to seek professional guidance from a therapist or counselor.
It's about tapping into that support system and creating a foundation of self-love and healthy boundaries that will serve you well in all areas of your life.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been such a rich and insightful conversation.
He has.
I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too. But before we wrap up, I'm curious, what's one piece of advice you would give to someone who's currently struggling in a one-sided relationship?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to remember that you are worthy of love and respect, and you deserve to be in a relationship that brings you joy, not drains you.
Beautiful, I love that. It's about reclaiming your power and choosing yourself. Speaking of which, do you have any final thoughts or resources you want to share with our listeners before we sign off?
You know, if you're feeling lost or overwhelmed, just remember that there is support available.
That's right.
Don't be afraid to reach out to trusted friends, family members, or a therapist. They can offer a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, and valuable perspectives.
Yeah, it's so true. Sometimes just talking things through can help us gain clarity and feel less alone in the process. And as you mentioned earlier, professional guidance can be incredibly helpful too.
Absolutely. A therapist can provide a safe and non-judgmental space for you to process your emotions, work through any underlying issues, and develop healthy coping mechanisms.
It's about investing in your well-being and equipping yourself with the tools to create healthier relationships in the future.
Exactly. And speaking of the future, one thing that often comes up when we talk about one-sided relationships is the fear of being alone.
Oh, yeah.
Many people stay in these unhealthy dynamics because they're afraid of ending up alone. But it's important to remember that being alone doesn't have to be a negative experience.
I love that. That's such a powerful point. It's almost like we need to reframe our relationship with being alone.
I agree. It's an opportunity for self-discovery, growth, and really understanding what brings you joy and fulfillment outside of a romantic relationship.
It's about cultivating that sense of self-love and independence.
Exactly. And when you're truly comfortable with yourself and your own company, you're more likely to attract healthy and balanced relationships into your life.
It's like that saying, you have to love yourself first. But let's be honest, putting yourself out there again after a difficult experience can be daunting.
Oh, for sure.
What advice do you have for people who are hesitant to open themselves up to new connections?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be patient with yourself.
Yeah.
Healing takes time, and it's okay to take things slow. Don't feel pressured to jump into a new relationship right away.
Yeah.
Focus on building your self-confidence, pursuing your passions, and connecting with friends and family.
It's about creating a life that feels full and vibrant on its own, and then allowing love to enter organically.
Exactly. And when you do feel ready to explore new connections, remember the lessons you've learned from past experiences.
Right.
Pay attention to those red flags, communicate your needs clearly, and don't be afraid to walk away if something doesn't feel right.
It's about trusting your instincts and prioritizing your well-being.
Absolutely. And remember, healthy relationships are out there. Don't give up on finding that connection that brings you joy, reciprocity, and a sense of true partnership.
That's such an inspiring message to end on. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful and empowering. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners feel equipped with the knowledge and tools to create healthier, more fulfilling relationships in their own lives.
Me too. And if you're looking for more support or resources on this topic, don't forget to check out the Live a Supercharged Life YouTube channel.
Yes.
There's a wealth of information on relationships, personal growth, and creating a life that truly lights you up.
It's a fantastic resource. And remember, you are not alone on this journey. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep living a supercharged life.